I want you to calm down and take a deep breath, because today's story is really special. Relax, inhale deeply, and get ready to dive into an amazing tale. You're about to wake up in a medieval village, and I should warn you, it's not glamorous, dears. It's not safe, and you definitely won't survive this without at least one festering sore. Still, that's part of the charm, right? Time travel hoffs, bad dental hygiene, and 100 creative ways to die before 30. So, quick thing before we dive in. If you enjoy these stories, hit like and subscribe. It really helps me out and helps this new channel reach 10K subscribers. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. You wake up face first in straw. Real pokey, dusty straw. Not the cute hayride kind. This stuff is stabbing your cheek. It smells like damp animal, warm sweat, and something vaguely mushroomy. You turn your head. You're in a hayloft. An actual hayloft. A chicken perches 3 inches from your nose, watching you like it owns the deed. Honestly, it probably does. The rafters creak above. The floor below is dirt. The barn doors are cracked just enough to leak in a blade of pale blue dawn. Morning, probably. You hope, you sit up and everything feels wrong. You're wearing a burlap tunic, basically a sack with holes. No underwear. Bold design choice. Your feet are bare, dusty, and someone has helpfully tied twine around your ankles to keep your shoes on. There are no shoes, just twine. A quick mental scan for anything modern. Phone, note, and wallet, not a chance. Dignity, hanging by a thread. Below, a man yells something in Middle English, or he's gargling gravel. Either way, not friendly. You creep to the edge, peek down. A very sweaty man is pitching hay with a pitchfork while a child, naked except for a goat, chases a creature that might be a rat or a ferret. Long tail, too many teeth. You climb the rickety ladder, you land badly. The chicken screams and flaps into your face. Welcome to the year 1327. Your name is irrelevant. If you insist, everyone will call you Thomas. If you're obviously female, Alice or Marjorie. Take your pick, there are 5 names to go around. Sweaty man squints up at you. You mumble something polite. He snorts, gestures at a heap of dung, and mutters the medieval equivalent of "get on with it." Naturally, you nod and walk off with purpose, doing that move where you pretend to know what you're doing. Outside, the village stretches along the road like someone tried to draw a town after hearing about towns once. Mud paths web between thatched cottages, held together by hope and urine. Chickens roam, pigs also roam. A woman is slapping laundry against a rock with enough force to summon demons. 2 men argue over either a stick or a very unfortunate loaf of bread. The smell hits like a wall. Smoke, manure, old fish, damp wool, something sweet and rotting. Your nose resigns immediately. Welcome to medieval life, full sensory, no refunds. A child sprints past shrieking, holding a frog by the leg like a trophy. No one cares. You think about asking for help, then remember modern English will sound like sorcery. You keep walking. At the edge of the village, a communal well leans under a crooked canopy. An old woman, possibly made of bark, eyes you as she lowers a bucket. You smile. She does not. Her mouth is a straight line of suspicion. The bucket thunks into the dark like a tiny funeral. A bell tolls. Bong, bong, bong. Time, warning, fear, got a clock? Unclear. But doors open. People trudge out with sacks and tools and faces that say they've seen things and did not enjoy them. You're swept along like a sad salmon toward a job you didn't apply for. By sunrise, you've looped the village 3 times, passed the same judgmental cow twice, and failed to locate a bathroom. You settle for a suspiciously flat rock behind a hedge and hope you don't break any divine laws. And then it hits you, this isn't a Renaissance fair, it's real. The ground is cold, your knees hurt, everything itches, and there's no going back, at least not yet. You're here with 1 tunic, no toothpaste, and 0 survival skills. Fun historical fact to soften the panic. Most peasants never traveled more than 10 miles from home. You've already walked farther than that looking for a privy. Congratulations, statistically above average. Quirky side note. Some villages buried shoes in walls to ward off evil. Unsure if it worked, but it explains why everyone is barefoot and your feet are freezing. Maybe you'll find a haunted clog by tomorrow. Scholars still argue, how bad was peasant life really? Eternal slog of back-breaking labor and early death, or joy in simple things, communal rhythms, feasts, saints' days. You're undecided, but as a goose honks directly into your soul and a rooster dive-bombs your head, you're leaning slog. You're being watched, not curious, more who let this barefoot weirdo in. The well woman is still glaring. Her bucket clacks up, revealing cloudy water that looks both thirst-quenching and dangerous. No one minds. Everyone's busy. Even the guy whose job appears to be holding a goat like a purse. A heavy hand slaps your back, the medieval version of corporate team building. You turn to a grin like a broken fence. Gaps where teeth should be, teeth where nothing should be. He shoves a wooden rake at you and says something that might be English if English had been dropped in a swamp and raised by wolves. You catch common field and get on. Then he's off, yelling at a chicken that might be his wife's mortal enemy. Congrats, you have a job. Raking. You inspect the tool. It's basically a branch someone whittled into a suggestion of a rake and prayed over. The tines are uneven, and it smells like damp mushrooms and despair. You drag it behind you toward the fields, muddy brown to the horizon, punctuated by stunted stalks, abandoned tools, and a deeply suspicious crow that looks like it moonlights as a demon in local folklore. The air is thick with mist and manure. You breathe through your mouth and immediately regret it. Someone passes cradling turnips like sacred treasure. Another haul stick strapped with what looks like goat gut. No one smiles except the children, who are ecstatically stabbing puddles and chasing a pig that seems to be winning. You get to work, sort of. You poke the dirt, drag the rake in short, guilty strokes. Your hands blister on contact, your back complains, your knees snap like kindling. It's not even noon. Medieval peasant life. Mostly sore muscles and character development you did not request. A nearby boy, 10 maybe, swings a hoe like he was born doing it, which he probably was. He catches you staring and smirks. You are certain he could outwork and outwit you with one hand tied and half a potato for lunch. Speaking of lunch, a rusty bell clanks at the field's edge. No dramatic halt, just a collective, grateful exhale. People shuffle back to the village. You waddle after them like a medieval duckling rake-tailing you. Lunch is a revelation. You are handed a hunk of dark bread that could double as a weapon and a tin cup of weak beer. It's warm and sour, but you drink. Water is basically gambling with dysentery. The bread is coarse, chewy, full of mystery grains and possibly pebbles. But it's carbs and you haven't eaten since waking up with a poultry entourage. Everyone eats in near silence, more fatigue than manners. You perch on an overturned bucket by a smoky fire. The beer buzz arrives just enough to dull your back, and the humiliation of being outperformed by goats and children. Historical tidbit for dessert. Most peasants owned 1 or 2 outfits, total. So yes, the scratchy sack you're wearing, that's the nice one. Laundry was a sometimes treat, depending on season, social status, and whether the neighbor's dog peed on you. Buttons are fancy and rare. Ties, laces, and brooches do the heavy lifting. If your tunic slips off a shoulder, that's not scandal. That's fashion. Another debate. How rigid was social life? Were you stuck at birth, or could a very clever and suspiciously clean peasant climb a rung? Some historians say yes, rare but real. Others say no, you were born into a cosmic joke and expected to laugh quietly until you died of foot rot. You look down at your feet. Mud bites rising despair, and decide the jury's still out. For now you stand, grab your tragic rake, and head back to the common field. Because here, in 1327, the day doesn't care who you were. It only cares whether you keep moving. Yeah, checks out. After lunch, it's back to the fields, because of course it is. No nap, no union breaks, just more mud, more raking, and the existential question of whether this counts as cardio. You start to notice the rhythm of things, the way people move, the unspoken choreography of shared labor. There's a strange beauty to it in a soul-crushing sort of way. No one's really talking, but everyone knows what to do. Even the animals seem like they've signed some unspoken labor agreement. Chickens peck without panic. Oxen plot with a resigned dignity. You mostly try not to fall into a ditch. Eventually the sun dips behind the low hills, casting everything in a soft golden hue. Someone shouts a final command and tools are gathered. Hands are wiped on tunics until the slow trudge back to the village begins. You follow, exhausted. Every muscle protesting your rake, now a burdensome relic of your terrible new life. As you reach the edge of the village, someone passes you a turnip. No explanation, just a cold, dirt-dusted turnip in your palm. You nod in confused gratitude. They nod back. Apparently this is the medieval version of small talk. You're too tired to question it. You wake up the next morning to the sound of a rooster screaming bloody murder 3 feet from your face. It's not just crowing, it's issuing threats. You roll over on the straw pile that's now your bed, but the movement triggers 100 sharp jabs from broken stalks and flea bites you definitely didn't have yesterday. There's also a weird wet patch. You pray it's just condensation and not some nocturnal gift from the chicken mafia. Your stomach growls like a medieval dragon. You're starving. Actual hollow ache in your ribs, kind of hungry. Turns out, manual labor on bread and weak beer doesn't cut it. You shuffle out of the barn, blinking against the early morning sun. The village is already alive, kind of. People walk around with the quiet misery of those who never got enough sleep and expect today to be only marginally worse than yesterday. You follow the scent of smoke and something vaguely edible toward a cottage with an open hearth. The air is thick with the smell of damp ash, sweat, and something that might be onions, or at least the ghost of onions. Inside, a woman is ladling a greyish sludge into wooden bowls. Her hair is tucked into a rough linen cloth, and she has the permanent squint of someone unimpressed with everything, including your face. She doesn't speak, just hands you a bowl and moves on. The bowl is warm. That's the nicest thing you can say about it. You stare into the contents. It's pottage, a catch-all term for whatever we had, boiled until dead. Today's version appears to contain barley, possibly cabbage, definitely water, and something suspiciously gelatinous that jiggles when you breathe near it. You take a tentative bite. It tastes like sadness and dirt. Not dirt as a flavor note, actual dirt. Still, you eat it because options are not on the menu. Beside you, a man with a face like old leather slurps his bowl loudly, then wipes his mouth with a sleeve that's seen better centuries. He offers you a hunk of dark bread, the same Churi's brick from yesterday. You take it, break off a piece, and dip it in the sludge. Somehow it makes it worse, like gritty gravy with a touch of mold. Excellent. You sip from a clay cup filled with more warm beer. Still flat, still sour, still better than dysentery. You remind yourself that medieval water was often straight-up poison. Wells weren't always clean. Rivers were basically open sewers. If you wanted to stay alive, you drank beer even for breakfast. It was weak but boiled, which meant fewer surprise plagues in your intestines. And speaking of plagues, you look around the room and realize everyone's skin has a faint, unhealthy palate, like they've all had a mild fever since birth. Their eyes are sunken, teeth, what's left above them, are varying shades of amber, and their hands are thick with calluses. They don't seem sick exactly, just used, like tools that were never put back in the shed. You finish your breakfast and try not to think too hard about how little nourishment it actually provided. But here's your fun historical fact for the day. For the average peasant, the diet was almost entirely bread, pottage, and ale. Meat was rare. Fruits and vegetables, seasonal luxuries, spices. Forget it. The most excitement your mouth would get was the occasional weevil surprise in your flour sack. Protein came from beans and lentils if you were lucky, and the occasional fish or egg, assuming the church calendar allowed it, of course. Now here's the quirky bit. Some medieval folks genuinely believed certain foods had moral consequences. Rich foods like pork or butter could lead to gluttony and sin. Cold, damp foods like cucumbers were considered dangerous. They were thought to chill the stomach and invite illness. Imagine telling your local priest that you ate a cucumber and he gasps like you just summoned a demon. And for the scholars in the back row, there's an ongoing debate about how bad peasant diets really were. Some records suggest villagers got more calories than you'd expect, especially during harvest. Others argue that constant food insecurity, malnutrition, and vitamin deficiencies were just facts of life. You personally are beginning to suspect that scurvy is in your future, and probably ricketts, possibly both. After breakfast, did you try to help clean up? But the quo-wearing woman shoos you away with the enthusiasm of someone swatting flies. Outside, the day has warmed just enough for the mud to smell stronger. Your stomach still rumbles, which feels deeply unfair. You just ate something. Something technically edible, probably. You wander back toward the field where you worked yesterday, rake in hand, when a small group of people passes you, chattering in low tones. You catch a few familiarish words: fire, grain, blessing, and then one that makes your ears perk up. Ergo. Ergo. That's fungus, a mold that grows on rye. Your 21st century brain jolts awake like a shared cat. Ergo causes hallucinations, seizures, and death. You vaguely remember it being connected to witch trials, or maybe poisoned bread in a French town. So either way, it's not something you want in your breakfast sludge. You think back to the bread from this morning. It had a slightly bitter taste, little tingle on the tongue. Could have just been age or psychotropic mold. You pass a pile of discarded loaves behind someone's cottage and notice something weird. Some of the bread is starry with purple-black patches. A woman nearby sees you staring and nods grimly. "Bad bread," she mutters, then points at her temple and waggles her hand. The universal sign for makes you go loopy. So yeah, not only is the food bland, it might also kill you with seizures. Fantastic. You start to see why beer was such a hit. You walk on, chewing what's left of your bread slowly and with growing suspicion. Now that you're paying attention, your fingers are twitching a bit. Could just be fatigue. Or maybe you're about to start seeing visions of St. Cabbage floating above the fields. Hard to say. At midday, you stop to rest under a tree. The sun is higher now, warming the earth and making everything smell like compost and goats. A group of kids plays nearby with a hoop and stick, laughing as they take turns chasing it through the mud. One of them is wearing a tunic so patched it looks like a medieval quilt. The kid waves at you. You wave back, unsure if this is a bonding moment or the beginning of some sort of curse. As you sit trying to ignore your twitchy fingers, you realize just how delicate survival is here. One bad loaf, one bad winter, one tooth infection. Life here isn't dramatic. It's just constant low-level danger wrapped in itchy linen. But you're not dead yet, just hungry. Probably poisoned, a little scared, but still breathing. So that's something. The rake is your new best friend. It's splintery, crooked, and about as effective as a spoon in a sword fight, but it gives your hand something to do. You're back in the fields again, because of course you are. There's no rotation system here. No. Let's try something different today. Maybe see how you do with the chickens. Nope. You rake. You rake some more. You rake until your shoulders hum like medieval tuning forks, and the skin on your palms threatens to unionize. The sun climbs slowly, but it's not warm. Not really. Just enough to make the mud steam slightly, and the smell of manure become extra-dimensional. You try to find a rhythm. Pull, drag, shuffle, repeat. The field stretches ahead of you like a punishment that was handed down personally by some vengeful agricultural deity. People work in quiet lines around you, bent double as if the earth demands their full attention and their spines. At some point, a boy, maybe 12, barefoot and weirdly confident, comes up beside you. He says something you don't quite catch, then laughs like he's told a great joke. You smile awkwardly. He nods approvingly and hands you what looks like a large wooden spoon. You stare at it. He minds stirring something, then points toward the far end of the field. Apparently your job has changed. You follow his lead and end up standing next to a big wooden trough, half filled with what might be compost or possibly food for pigs. Or compost and food for pigs. Hard to tell. You're instructed via many enthusiastic gestures to stir it. That's it. Just stir the sludge. It smells like sour milk and cabbage regret. You do it anyway because at this point you've accepted your fate as a human ladle. Here's today's historical flavor nugget. Most peasants had a very seasonal, highly specific job roster. In spring it was plowing and planting, summer hoeing and haymaking. Autumn was all about harvesting and getting ready to absolutely not die during winter. And in winter, people mostly tried to avoid freezing, starving, or both. Stirring pig slot might not be on the fancy charts, but it was part of the system. Everyone worked, no exception. Even the chickens seemed busy. The sun climbs higher, and the Vasau in the village takes on that strange hum of semi-productive energy. A group of women heads toward the river with bundles of laundry and hunched shoulders that say, "We're going to complain about this loudly." A shepherd strolls past with a dog that looks more wolf than pet. The pig pen erupts into chaos as one particularly bold hog stages a daring escape, only to be lured back with a turnip and some yelling. You stir your bucket. The pig watches you. You feel judged. It's around midday when something finally breaks the monotony. A sharp whistle from the edge of the field, followed by raised voices and the unmistakable sound of running. You stop stirring and shade your eyes. A group of villagers is chasing someone fast. It's a boy older than the first one, maybe 16, sprinting with the agility of someone who's stolen something important. He darts past you, breath ragged, face pale, clutching what looks like a loaf of bread or possibly a cheese. Either way, it's not his. He doesn't get far. A pair of strong-armed men tackle him into the mud like it's the peasant Super Bowl. The bread or cheese goes flying. Everyone gathers quickly. You, of course, drift toward the action because nothing in this village ever happens quickly or interestingly, and this is the first real drama you've seen all day. There's shouting, spitting, a lot of hand-waving. The boy is dragged toward the village green, still squirming. People mutter about stealing from the Lord's store and no respect, and last week's bad omen. You catch the word stocks and feel your stomach clench. Minutes later, the boy is locked into a crude wooden frame in front of the church, hands and head trapped in the classic medieval punishment pose. His expression shifts from fear to defiance to boredom in rapid succession. A little girl throws a clump of hay at him. Someone else launches a cabbage. You back away slowly, suddenly very aware of how little it takes to shift from villager to villain around here. And here's the odd offbeat fact of the day. In some medieval villages, punishments were a social event. Stocks, pillories, and public shaming weren't just about justice. They were entertainment. People brought snacks, kids threw things. It was a whole vibe. In some places, the stocks were right next to the tavern for maximum ridicule efficiency. Just imagine trying to enjoy your beer while Gary from down the lane is getting pelted with onions for tax evasion. Meanwhile, historians still can't agree on how much crime there actually was in medieval villages. Some claim crime was rampant, thieving, fighting, duck theft, the works. Others argue that tight-knit communities self so well that most disputes were resolved with shouting, or possibly just passive-aggressive goat placement, what everyone agrees on. If you were caught stealing, especially from the Lord's stores, you are absolutely getting the full humiliation package. You wander back to the trough feeling weirdly anxious, not because you stole anything, but because now you've seen how fragile status is here. One wrong move, one misunderstood action, and you're the one getting turnips thrown at your head. Afternoon stretches on. The sky turns a bruised shade of grey. A cold wind picks up, scattering bits of hay and dust into your eyes. You keep stirring, half out of duty, half out of fear that if you stop, someone will notice and promote you to cabbage target. Eventually, someone rings a little iron bell again, the signal to stop work. People gather their tools and trudge back toward their homes with the silent fatigue of a life that doesn't allow sick days. You follow, not even pretending to know where you're supposed to go anymore. Dinner is almost the same as breakfast. Pottage again, though this one is thicker and has a few visible peas. Luxury. The bread is slightly less brick-like. The beer is warmer. You sit near the fire and try not to think about the boy in the stocks. He's still out there, probably cold, embarrassed, possibly unconscious, under a small mountain of produce. You curl up in the barn again, burying yourself in straw and trying to find one non-scratchy spot to rest your face. Tomorrow will be more of the same. More mud, more awkward tools, possibly more legally sanctioned public shaming. But you're learning slowly. You haven't been arrested, you haven't hallucinated, you haven't died yet. All in all, a productive day. You wake up with your mouth full of straw, and the overwhelming sensation that your spine has folded itself into a medieval pretzel. Every joint cacks like you've been used as a barn door overnight. You sit up slowly, brushing off the usual scattering of hay, feathers, and one very indignant beetle from your tunic. A chicken watches you from the rafters, making eye contact like it knows something about your future and is deeply disappointed in it. Outside, the village is quiet, eerily so. No rooster screaming, no children shrieking. No pigs running loose like the drunk uncles of the animal world. Just a low fog creeping in through the trees and the occasional bark of a distant dog. You step outside and immediately shiver. The morning is damp and cold, the kind of chill that settles in your bones and whispers, "Hope you like joint pain." You wander toward the hearth house, hoping for breakfast, or at least something warm to hold. You're not even hungry at this point, just craving calories in any form. Inside, the usual woman is stirring a pot of pottage, but there's a strange tension in the air. She glances up and narrows her eyes as you approach. There's a whisper spreading across the room like cold butter on stale bread. Someone ate the wrong bread. You get your bowl of sludge and retreat to a corner, eyes wide, ears open. A man is being carried in through the doorway, slumped between two others like a sack of flour. He's not unconscious, exactly. His eyes are open, but he's twitching, jerking every few seconds like his body's forgotten how to be inside itself. Someone says the word curse. Someone else mutters witch. You take a bite of your pottage and immediately regret it. It's different today, tangja darker. The barley is bitter. You quietly set the bowl down. Here's your historical reality check. In medieval Europe, ergot fungus, yes, the same one that you may or may not have tasted yesterday, could infect a rye grain and led to a condition called St. Anani's fire. People who ate the contaminated bread experienced hallucinations, convulsions, and gangrene. Yes, actual gangrene. Fun times. And since nobody understood mold or microscopic life, the default explanation was either demonic possession or divine punishment. Nothing like spiritual panic to spice up your breakfast. A small crowd gathers around the twitching man. Someone starts praying loudly. Another person ties a string of wooden beads around the man's wrist. There's mention of the herbalist, but also hesitation. She lives on the edge of the woods, which is practically another country as far as the village is concerned. You get the feeling they only call her when things have escalated past the reach of prayer and leeches. The man moans and clutches his stomach. You edge away, not entirely sure whether this is a moldy bread situation or just a poorly timed hernia. Either way, you're not getting involved. Not today. You've decided your new goal is simply, don't eat cursed bread. That's it. That's the bar. You return to the field trying to shake the image of the man's trembling hands. The work today is more of the same. Drugging, shoveling, pretending you know what the weeds look like. Your body protests with every motion, but there's a rhythm to it now. You don't think about the pain as much. You focus on the sound of the wind rustling through the stunted stalks, the low mumble of other workers, the distant bell that rings in odd intervals from the church tower. Time is kept by bell and shadow here, and neither cares if you're having a breakdown. Around midday, a reeve walks through the fields. You've seen him before. He's the tax collector's slightly more tolerable cousin. Reeve duties include organizing labor, settling petty disputes, and ensuring the Lord gets what's his. He wears a dark wool cloak and carries a stick not quite long enough to beat anyone with, but definitely long enough to tap things disapprovingly. He stops to talk to one of the workers, then gestures to you. You freeze. He says something, then waits. You nod like you understand. He repeats it slower. Still nothing. He frowns and waves you over with the same expression someone uses when calling a particularly stubborn mule. You follow, rake in hand, hot doing the medieval equivalent of buffering. Turns out you've been reassigned, not fed, just rotated. You're now helping grind grain at the village mill. You don't know whether to be relieved or terrified. On one hand, no more mystery cottage. On the other, giant grindstones sound like a great way to lose a limb. The mill sits near a sluggish stream, this wooden wheel lazily turning in the current. It's not picturesque exactly, more like functional decay. You step inside and are hit by the overwhelming scent of old grain, damp wood, and a faint burnt aroma that makes your eyes water. Inside, an older man with arms like tree trunks shows you the basics. Pour the grain into the top chute. Guide the flour out of the bottom. Don't stick your fingers anywhere near the grinding stones. You nod, trying not to imagine your entire hand becoming a medieval pancake. You spend the next few hours feeding sacks of rye and barley into the grinding machine, watching as the stones groan and spin. The flour comes out in little puffs, soft and greyish. You're covered in it within minutes. It clings to your clothes, your skin, your eyelashes. You sneeze, and it's like setting off a powder bomb. The old man chuckles without mirth and slaps your back hard enough to rearrange your organs. Here's your quirky fact for the day. Millers were often among the most disliked people in the village. Why? Because they handled the grain and always seemed to take a little extra for themselves. They were seen as sneaky, slightly magical, and often suspicious. Want to start a good medieval rumor? Accuse the miller of shorting your flour or consorting with the devil, or both. Meanwhile, scholars still bicker about whether the whole bread poisoning situation was as widespread as people think. Some argue that outbreaks of ergotism were rare and localized. Others suggest it was more common but poorly recorded or attributed to supernatural causes instead of bad agriculture. Either way, it's one of those things that makes you appreciate modern food safety regulations, even if they come with 100 acronyms and a barcode on everything. As the sun dips low, the miller sends you off with a pat on the shoulder and a small cloth sack of flour. Your wages, apparently. You carry it carefully like it's made of glass. Flour here is literal gold dust. People eye it as you pass, but no one says a word. Everyone knows the risks of robbing a flour carrier. You don't want to end up in the stocks pelted with the very grain you tried to steal. Back in the barn, you collapse onto your hay pile, flour still clinging to your nose and ears. You think about the man who collapsed earlier. No one mentioned him again, no one needed to. That's how things go here. You're useful until you're not, healthy until you're not, alive until, well, you get the idea. And as you drift into sleep, the smell of burned rye still in your nostrils, you make a simple despair wish. Please, no more pottage tomorrow. You wake up to the sound of someone arguing with a goat. Not yelling, arguing, full sentences. The goat appears to be winning. You open your eyes and stare up at the hayloft ceiling, where a spider the size of a coin is dangling ominously over your face. You make a small noise of existential dread and roll to the side, only to land with a thump in yesterday is dried out straw and a few suspiciously warm chicken droppings. It's another morning in paradise. You dust yourself off and shuffle outside. The village is already in motion. People swarming around like bees in wool tunics, each with a mission that usually involves moving mud from one place to another. You decide to skip breakfast, not out of bravery, more out of pottage fatigue and a cautious desire to not consume another dose of potential rye fungus. Your stomach growls like a medieval curse, but you ignore it. You've started to appreciate hunger. Hunger means you're still alive. You don't make it 10 FT before a man with a leather pouch and a very smug look calls out to you. He's dressed slightly nicer than the rest of the villagers. His clothes are cleaner, better dyed, and his boots actually exist. He waves you over with the same kind of friendliness a cat uses before it claws your face. You approach with deep suspicion. Never trust anyone with clean shoes in a place like this. He introduces himself as the Reeve, not the one who reassigns you to pig stirring. This one's more official. Turns out today is tax day and you, dear peasant, are on the list. You blink at him. He explains using lots of finger-pointing and slow word, is that every family owes the Lord a share of their harvest, a portion of their livestock, and random fees like road use, firewood collection, and existing in the year 1327. You, of course, have nothing. He doesn't seem bothered. Instead, he pulls out a tiny wooden tablet with some scratched-in symbols and marks something off with a quill. Then he tells you the good news. Your labor counts as tax. You're now officially working to pay off your existence. Your debt, as it were, is your own physical suffering. And here's a cheerful historical fact. In many medieval villages, peasants owed taxes to their local lord, their church, and sometimes even a monarch they'd never seen. These taxes came in the form of grain, wool, eggs, and other goods. Or if you had none of those, you're back. It was called labor rent, and it meant spending part of your week doing work for the Lord instead of yourself. You are a tenant on his land, and everything you did was essentially part of your running tab. You try asking what happens if someone doesn't pay. The Reeve smiles not kindly as if on cue. You pass a cart loaded with firewood creaking under its weight. 2 boys are dragging it toward the manor house, sweat dripping from their faces. It's their family's timber fee for building a small shed last spring. One of them stumbles, nearly toppling the load, and a nearby guard gives him a solid whack on the shoulder with a stick. Not hard enough to injure, just enough to remind everyone who's in charge. You keep walking, you end up back at the mill because apparently flour doesn't grind itself, and you're still the newest unpaid intern in the feudal system. The old miller grunts in recognition and hands you another bag to haul. It's heavier than yesterday's, and halfway through carrying it, you seriously consider inventing the wheelbarrow a few centuries early. As you work, you start thinking about what it means to own something here. You don't own your clothes, they were probably handed down through 3 cousins and a cow. You don't own your time, it's taxed. You don't own your labor, it's taxed too. Even the hut you sometimes sleep in, not yours, it belongs to the Lord. Everything circles back to the guy in the manor house who, if rumors are true, once bought an entire pig just to see if it could eat an eel. Here's a fun fringe fact for the day. Some lords tax peasants for using the oven. The communal bakehouse in a village wasn't just a place to make bread, it was a source of income. You couldn't bake at home. That was illegal. If you got caught with your own oven, you'd be fined or worse. So yes, in a very real way, even your bread came with a search charge. By midday, your arms are burning and your stomach has decided it's done being polite. You sneak back toward the hearth house and find someone handing out scraps of cold barley cake and a chunk of dried fish that smells like regret and low tide. You eat it anyway. As bad as it is, it's food, and you're learning the hierarchy of pain here. Hunger is worse than taste. Later in the day, you get your first real look at the Lord's manor. It's not a castle. Don't get excited. It's a large wooden house with a boarstone foundation, some glass windows, which in this context is like having a moon base and a crude fence surrounding it. Compared to the hovels in the village, it's Versailles. Compared to anything modern, it's a well-decorated shed with a superiority complex. You're not allowed inside, obviously, but you glimpse the household staff moving back and forth. Servants in slightly cleaner tunics, a man polishing armor that hasn't been used in 20 years, a kitchen boy dragging a dead goose by the neck. There's a smell of roast meat in the air, and it makes your stomach ache in new and personal ways. Someone near you mutters, 10 eggs a month. That's what he gets from our cooper. Another replies, and 3 from mine. They're not angry, just tired. This is how it's always been. No one questions the system. You give or you're punished, you work or you're replaced. And here's where historians like to argue. Was the feudal tax system exploitative or just functional? Some say it kept everyone alive in a fragile economy. Others say it ensured the majority suffered quietly while a small group of people lived slightly more comfortably. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, a delicate, miserable balance between survival and servitude. By sunset, you're sore, hungry again, and mentally calculating how many eggs you've ever eaten in your life, just to see if you've hit a taxable limit. You trudge back to the barn, sack of flour slung over your shoulder like a badge of peasant honor. As you settle into your hay pile, you realize something. You're becoming invisible, not in a sad, ghost-like way, but in the way that everyone else here is. You're just another set of hands, another name on a list, no different from yesterday's rake or today's sack of barley. Somehow that's starting to feel normal. Morning doesn't arrive so much as happen to you. You blink awake with straw pasted to your cheek and a chicken roosting confidently on your hip. She stares like you're the unwelcome guest, which is fair. You shoo her off and sit up, joints creaking in the key of C minor peasant lament. Your mouth is dry, your hands are swollen from yesterday's work, and something bit your ankle in the night. Probably a flea. Could have been the chicken. At this point, the difference feels philosophical. You drag yourself out into the cool mist. The sky is a dull grey smear. The village is already humming. Low voices, cartwheels complaining, dogs barking at nothing in particular. It's a rhythm you're starting to recognize. Everyone knows where they belong. Everyone but you. You head toward the center to sniff out a task you can convincingly fake. Instead, a short, broad woman with a bundle of wet linens and a last smiled at the previous eclipse expression shoves a dripping shirt into your hands. The words are unclear. The tone is universal. Help now. She leads you to a squat stone building by the well. Warm air, lazy smoke, a domed oven glowing at its heart. Inside smells like yeast, damp linen, and overcooked onions. Women move through the room in a practiced loop, kneading dough, slapping clothes on boards, muttering in a steady, gossipy tempo. You've entered the communal oven house, local hotspot, literally. Two functions rule here: bake the village's bread, process the village's laundry. Bonus functions: dry herbs, swap news, recalibrate reputations. Within 10 minutes you know who's sick, who's pregnant, who's cheating, who has lice, and which priest is receiving suspicious eggs under the table. The smoke is nearly masked by the aroma of boiling scandal. History nugget: many villages ran communal bakehouses. Families prepped dough at home, then brought it here to save fuel and labor. Taxed, of course. Nothing's free, even bread gets billed. You try to vanish into a corner, but a cloth is thrust at you, and a bench of damp tunics materializes under your hands. Beating linen turns out to be therapeutic in a brutal, wrist-ruining way. Two elderly women whisper whether the reeve bears a devil's birthmark on his upper thigh. You do not visualize this. You fail. Someone slips you a warm crust, dense, earthy, fungus-free. You chew carefully, grateful for something that doesn't taste like boiled cabbage regrets. Did you hear about Ralph's youngest? A woman with blacksmith forearms leans in. Dreamed of fire 2 nights running. Fire that burns the sky. Bad omen, plague, war, take your pick. Another woman crosses herself. A third mutters, or he ate last week's barley. Quirky fact: dreams matter here. They're messages. From God, the devil, or ancestors with unfinished gossip. A child dreaming of fire could mean anything from illness to weather, or indigestion. Either way, the village treats it like news. A quick flare snaps the room to attention when a cloth kisses the oven. Buckets fly, stew douses, steam hisses. Order returns inside a minute. No panic, no screaming. Not their first ember dance. After, the forearm lady pats the bench and eyes you. You're not from here, are you? You freeze, then mumble, the South. She snorts. Everyone's from the South when they don't want to say. She lets it go, passes another heel of bread, and resumes shirt thrashing. Scholars love to argue, were villages tight-knit and caring, or petty and suspicious? You're landing on both. People rely on each other and also watch each other closely. The court of public opinion never adjourns, especially for strangers. By mid-afternoon, your arms are noodles, you smell like smoke and onions, and you know far too much about the reeve's daughter. Work winds down not with a whistle but a drift. Time here isn't measured, it's observed, guessed at, collectively agreed upon. Outside the air is cooler. You're not just dirty, though you are resplendently filthy, you're altered. You were part of something, not joyfully, not by choice, but you were in the room where it happened and you didn't sink. Tom, someone calls, the name they've assigned you. One of the oven women tosses a cloth bundle, half a loaf and a wedge of dried cheese. Payment rendered, nods exchanged, ledger closed. You sleep that night with yeast in your hair, and the sensation of being formally inducted into the village gossip machine. Jury's out on whether that's a blessing. For now, you have bread, straw, and a chicken who's finally chosen a new victim. You're practically thriving. And here's a cheerful historical fact. In many medieval villages, peasants owed taxes to their local lord, their church, and sometimes even a monarch they'd never seen. These taxes came in the form of grain, wool, eggs, and other goods. Or if you had none of those, you're back. It was called labor rent, and it meant spending part of your week doing work for the Lord instead of yourself. You are a tenant on his land, and everything you did was essentially part of your running tab. You try asking what happens if someone doesn't pay. The reeve smiles not kindly as if on cue. You pass a cart loaded with firewood creaking under its weight. 2 boys are dragging it toward the manor house, sweat dripping from their faces. It's their family's timber fee for building a small shed last spring. One of them stumbles, nearly toppling the load, and a nearby guard gives him a solid whack on the shoulder with a stick. Not hard enough to injure, just enough to remind everyone who's in charge. You keep walking, you end up back at the mill because apparently flour doesn't grind itself, and you're still the newest unpaid intern in the feudal system. The old miller grunts in recognition and hands you another bag to haul. It's heavier than yesterday's, and halfway through carrying it, you seriously consider inventing the wheelbarrow a few centuries early. As you work, you start thinking about what it means to own something here. You don't own your clothes, they were probably handed down through 3 cousins and a cow. You don't own your time, it's taxed. You don't own your labor, it's taxed too. Even the hut you sometimes sleep in, not yours. It belongs to the Lord. Everything circles back to the guy in the manor house who, if rumors are true, once bought an entire pig just to see if it could eat an eel. Here's a fun fringe fact for the day. Some lords tax peasants for using the oven. The communal bakehouse in a village wasn't just a place to make bread, it was a source of income. You couldn't bake at home. That was illegal. If you got caught with your own oven, you'd be fined or worse. So yes, in a very real way, even your bread came with a search charge. By midday, your arms are burning and your stomach has decided it's done being polite. You sneak back toward the hearth house and find someone handing out scraps of cold barley cake and a chunk of dried fish that smells like regret and low tide. You eat it anyway. As bad as it is, it's food, and you're learning the hierarchy of pain here. Hunger is worse than taste. Later in the day, you get your first real look at the Lord's manor. It's not a castle. Don't get excited. It's a large wooden house with a boarstone foundation, some glass windows, which in this context is like having a moon base and a crude fence surrounding it. Compared to the hovels in the village, it's Versailles. Compared to anything modern, it's a well-decorated shed with a superiority complex. You're not allowed inside, obviously, but you glimpse the household staff moving back and forth. Servants in slightly cleaner tunics, a man polishing armor that hasn't been used in 20 years, a kitchen boy dragging a dead goose by the neck. There's a smell of roast meat in the air, and it makes your stomach ache in new and personal ways. Someone near you mutters, 10 eggs a month. That's what he gets from our cooper. Another replies, and 3 from mine. They're not angry, just tired. This is how it's always been. No one questions the system. You give or you're punished, you work or you're replaced. And here's where historians like to argue. Was the feudal tax system exploitative or just functional? Some say it kept everyone alive in a fragile economy. Others say it ensured the majority suffered quietly while a small group of people lived slightly more comfortably. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, a delicate, miserable balance between survival and servitude. By sunset, you're sore, hungry again, and mentally calculating how many eggs you've ever eaten in your life, just to see if you've hit a taxable limit. You trudge back to the barn, sack of flour slung over your shoulder like a badge of peasant honor. As you settle into your hay pile, you realize something. You're becoming invisible, not in a sad, ghost-like way, but in the way that everyone else here is. You're just another set of hands, another name on a list, no different from yesterday's rake or today's sack of barley. Somehow that's starting to feel normal. Morning doesn't arrive so much as happen to you. You blink awake with straw pasted to your cheek and a chicken roosting confidently on your hip. She stares like you're the unwelcome guest, which is fair. You shoo her off and sit up, joints creaking in the key of C minor peasant lament. Your mouth is dry, your hands are swollen from yesterday's work, and something bit your ankle in the night. Probably a flea. Could have been the chicken. At this point, the difference feels philosophical. You drag yourself out into the cool mist. The sky is a dull grey smear. The village is already humming. Low voices, cartwheels complaining, dogs barking at nothing in particular. It's a rhythm you're starting to recognize. Everyone knows where they belong. Everyone but you. You head toward the center to sniff out a task you can convincingly fake. Instead, a short, broad woman with a bundle of wet linens and a last smiled at the previous eclipse expression shoves a dripping shirt into your hands. The words are unclear. The tone is universal. Help now. She leads you to a squat stone building by the well. Warm air, lazy smoke, a domed oven glowing at its heart. Inside smells like yeast, damp linen, and overcooked onions. Women move through the room in a practiced loop, kneading dough, slapping clothes on boards, muttering in a steady, gossipy tempo. You've entered the communal oven house, local hotspot, literally. 2 functions rule here: bake the village's bread, process the village's laundry. Bonus functions: dry herbs, swap news, recalibrate reputations. Within 10 minutes you know who's sick, who's pregnant, who's cheating, who has lice, and which priest is receiving suspicious eggs under the table. The smoke is nearly masked by the aroma of boiling scandal. History nugget: many villages ran communal bakehouses. Families prepped dough at home, then brought it here to save fuel and labor. Taxed, of course. Nothing's free, even bread gets billed. You try to vanish into a corner, but a cloth is thrust at you and a bench of damp tunics materializes under your hands. Beating linen turns out to be therapeutic in a brutal, wrist-ruining way. Two elderly women whisper whether the reeve bears a devil's birthmark on his upper thigh. You do not visualize this. You fail. Someone slips you a warm crust, dense, earthy, fungus-free. You chew carefully, grateful for something that doesn't taste like boiled cabbage regrets. Did you hear about Ralph's youngest? A woman with blacksmith forearms leans in. Dreamed of fire 2 nights running. Fire that burns the sky. Bad omen, plague, war, take your pick. Another woman crosses herself. A third mutters, or he ate last week's barley. Quirky fact. Dreams matter here. They're messages. From God, the devil, or ancestors with unfinished gossip. A child dreaming of fire could mean anything from illness to weather or indigestion. Either way, the village treats it like news. A quick flare snaps the room to attention when a cloth kisses the oven. Buckets fly, stew douses, steam hisses. Order returns inside a minute. No panic, no screaming. Not their first ember dance. After, the forearm lady pats the bench and eyes you. You're not from here, are you? You freeze, then mumble the south. She snorts. Everyone's from the south when they don't want to say. She lets it go, passes another heel of bread, and resumes shirt thrashing. Scholars love to argue, were villages tight-knit and caring, or petty and suspicious? You're landing on both. People rely on each other and also watch each other closely. The court of public opinion never adjourns, especially for strangers. By mid-afternoon, your arms are noodles, you smell like smoke and onions, and you know far too much about the Reeve's daughter. Work winds down not with a whistle but a drift. Time here isn't measured, it's observed, guessed at, collectively agreed upon. Outside the air is cooler. You're not just dirty, though you are resplendently filthy, you're altered. You were part of something, not joyfully, not by choice, but you were in the room where it happened and you didn't sink. Tom, someone calls, the name they've assigned you. One of the oven women tosses a cloth bundle, half a loaf and a wedge of dried cheese. Payment rendered, nods exchanged, ledger closed. You sleep that night with yeast in your hair, and the sensation of being formally inducted into the village gossip machine. Jury's out on whether that's a blessing. For now, you have bread, straw, and a chicken who's finally chosen a new victim. You're practically thriving. You wake before the rooster, minor miracle. The barn hums with wind through gaps. The chickens, for once, are asleep, probably plotting. Your limbs protest, your back sulks, yet your brain is clearer. Maybe the bread. Maybe your circadian rhythm finally surrendered to poultry. You stretch, step into pre-dawn blues and pinks. The village is actually quiet. No yelling, no carts, no crying, just an owl clocking off and frost crunching under your bare feet. Bare again. Yesterday's shoes, twine and optimism disintegrated while you were laundering secrets into linen. You head for the church, not for piety but because it's the only place you haven't poked into. It looks like a stone toad with a wooden bell tower balancing on its head. Moss, crooked door, undeniable presence. Inside, cool incense and dim light. Dust floats in spears through narrow windows. Wooden pews worn smooth by centuries of elbows. A faded altar, a brass cross that glows like it remembers better days. A few villagers kneel in silence. You copy them because what else do you do? It's too early to rake anything. A monk appears in the not dramatic way of people who live in churches. Brown robe, rope belt, lined face, kind eyes. He chants in Latin. You understand none of it. Neither, judging by the mumbling, does anyone else, but the rhythm is muscle memory. You mirror the nods and murmurs. Nobody corrects you. It's weirdly calming, candle wax, damp stone, a ritual that asks only your presence. History nugget. The church is the village's backbone, timekeeper, judge, tax collector, registrar of births, marriages and deaths. The calendar itself is a church document, feasts, fasts, anxiety. When the prayer ends, people rise with jointed groans and drift out. You follow and notice the bell is silent. No hour marks, no call. The village runs on that bell. Miss a toll and the day slips, washing late, fields mistimed, bread misbaked. A boy clambers into the tower, rope over a shoulder, looking 12 and absolutely unqualified to manage time. "Rope stuck again," he yells to no one, then vanishes. It hits you how manual everything is. Time is what the monk says, what the bell agrees to, what the sun implies. Quirky fact, early 14th century villages rarely had mechanical clocks. Wealthy towns might boast a water clock or a temperamental gearwork. Here it's a kid, a knot, and a prayer. You spend the afternoon shadowing the monk, who seems to have adopted you. He speaks little, sets you to refilling candles, sweeping steps, carrying a small jug of wine from a locked cabinet, watched like it holds the grail. Proximity to church is a thin shield, less shoutable, slightly less suspicious. He slips you a dried apple slice before you go. Leathery hope. That night, as you return to the barn, the bell finally rings. 3 slow, uneven clangs staggering across the fields. Someone fixed the rope. Chickens complain. A dog gives one theatrical howl and quits. You lie in straw with the apple core in your hand and feel, not safety exactly, rhythm. This place runs on it, rituals, routines, responsibilities, and you're beginning to fall into step. You wonder if anyone at home would believe this, that you wake with chickens, time your day by bell and get the news from a smoke-thick breadroom. Here, time is sacred, slippery, and slightly unreliable. You drift off to the memory of the monk's cadence, candle softness, and the bell learning itself again in the dark. What you miss most this morning isn't plumbing, chargers, or even breakfast burritos. It's showers, hot ones that fog mirrors and make you feel reborn. Your closest cleansing ritual so far was falling in a muddy ditch and pretending it was on purpose. Today starts like most. Straw hair, fresh bites, a chicken deeply offended by your existence. But as you stumble into grey light, scratching and choking on barn dust, something's different. People are hauling buckets, not to fields, not to animals, to the river. Bath day. Temper expectations. No loofahs, no lavender. This is functional nudity and freezing water with witnesses. But apparently once or twice a month, depending on the weather and everyone's collective will to survive, the village attempts something resembling communal hygiene. You trail the crowd down the narrow path that leads to the riverbank, where the water moves slow and brown, and just clear enough to reflect your increasingly haunted expression. There's already a small fire going. Someone boiling water in a soot-blackened pot, and muttering about the last time someone tried to bathe upstream and caused a minor crisis involving fish and sin. You don't even know where to start. There's no soap, just handfuls of gritty sand and bundles of crushed herbs that smell like pine and something a little medicinal. People are already stripping down unbothered. Children shriek as they're dunked into the shallows. Adults wash quietly, methodically, some scrubbing their arms with what looks like last season's moss. You stand at the edge, arms folded, weighing the risk of exposure against the promise of finally getting the filth off your skin. You eventually settle for a semi-private area behind a bush and wade into the icy water, which hits you like a slap from history itself. Every nerve lights up. Your breath catches. You immediately regret every decision that led to this moment. But then you dunk your head under, and when you come back up gasping and dripping and slightly horrified, something shifts. Your skin tingles. The cold becomes bearable. You feel reset. Here's your historical fact. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people did bathe. Not often, and definitely not with luxury, but hygiene wasn't ignored. Bathhouse existed in towns and rivers served rural communities. People used herbs and rough cloths to clean themselves. And yes, they understood that clean skin meant fewer infections, even if they didn't know what a germ was. The everyone was filthy myth is mostly an exaggeration, though you'd be forgiven for believing it. After 5 minutes in this village, once you're relatively clean or at least slightly less crunchy, you step out and dry yourself with the least damp part of your tunic. Around you, others are doing the same, some chatting, some humming. There's a strange sense of camaraderie and shared discomfort. A woman hands you a sprig of rosemary. You think it's for scent. You shove it under your armpit. She nods approvingly. Then someone screams, not in pain, more in surprise. Everyone turns. A young man is leaping out of the water, clutching his foot and shouting something about a water demon. People rush over. You do too, because let's be honest, it's probably not a demon. It's a leech. You're correct. A fat, wriggling, absolutely horrendous leech is hanging from his big toe. A nearby boy flicks it off with a stick and throws it into the bushes. The young man swears loudly and hops in circles. People mutter about omens, then go back to washing. You make a mental note to avoid river bathing for the next decade or so. Quirky fact of the day. In some parts of medieval Europe, bathing was associated with moral decay, not because cleanliness was bad, but because bathhouse in cities often doubled as, well, other establishments. So public bathing acquired a reputation. In some towns, the church discouraged it entirely, arguing that too much naked relaxation could lead to thoughts that weren't strictly pious, because of course it did. You finish drying off and feel good. Not clean, but the best you felt since arriving. Your skin no longer itches from straw mites. Your feet aren't encased in mud, and there's something psychologically powerful about scrubbing a week's worth of suffering from your limbs, even if you immediately get dusty again walking back to the village. As you return hair dripping, someone offers you a hunk of bread and a boiled egg. You take both gratefully and sit near the fire to warm your hands. People are laughing now. Bath day, it turns out, is a bit of a holiday. Spirits are higher. No one's arguing. The bread is only slightly burnt. Even the Reeves seems in a good mood. Possibly because he didn't have to fish any bodies out of the river this time. Here's something historians still wrestle with. Were medieval people really bothered by dirt and cell? Or had they simply adjusted their expectations? Some records show nobles washing their hands before and after meals, using scented cloths and herbs to freshen up. But in villages like this, dirt was normal, scent was personal, and your bathing schedule was tied to weather, opportunity, and the occasional leech-related trauma. That evening, you curl up in your hay nest, feeling almost civilized. Your hair is still damp. Your tunic clings in places it shouldn't. But your skin feels new, like it remembers what air feels like. You lie on your back, staring at the beams above, and think about how much of daily life here is about just trying to stay warm, trying to stay clean, trying to survive, and occasionally trying to feel human. You fall asleep smelling faintly of rosemary, river mud, and something that almost passes for dignity. You wake up to something soft brushing your forehead. For one fleeting moment you think, wow, a gentle breeze. How poetic. Then you open your eyes and realize it's a goat's nose. A very moist, very nosy goat is breathing directly into your face, like it's trying to decide if you're edible, or just a very ugly patch of grass. You sit up with a startled grunt, startling the goat, who bleats in disgust and promptly poops in your straw pile as a farewell gift. Great. A fresh start to another glorious medieval day. You shuffle outside into the golden haze of morning and immediately notice something different. The air smells marginally better than usual. Less pig, more hearth smoke, less manure, more something vaguely meaty. That's when you remember what one of the oven house women whispered yesterday. Today's the day some of the villagers make their offering at the Lord's Manor, which means it's also one of the rare days when the inside of that place gets a little more visible to people who don't own land. Armor or an unnecessary number of dogs. You follow the slow procession, heading up the slope toward the manor. Most carry baskets, eggs, cheese, a scrawny hen, a jug of wine that smells halfway turned. Everyone looks nervous but beautiful. This isn't a party. This is feudal PR. You show up, give your taxes and food and handmade goods, smile like it didn't cost you your winter reserves, and hope the Lord doesn't ask for anything weird in return. The manor up close looks like it's trying very hard to impress someone. Not you, obviously. The Lord, maybe God, is bigger than anything else around, with thick stone walls. Second floor fancy. A wooden balcony that leans at an angle, suggesting it may have once hosted a drunk night, and colorful banners that flap lazily in the breeze. There's a garden too, though most of it looks like parsley and overconfident weeds. You join the line of peasants waiting at the gates, watching as each is waved through by two guards in armor that's more rust than metal. They glance at your empty hands. You panic for a second, then hold up your best poor person expression, wide-eyed, humble, slightly tragic. It works. One of the guards just grunts and lets you in. Apparently, curiosity is an acceptable form of tribute. Inside, the manor is less glamorous. It smells like damp wool and roasted something. The floor is dirt, packed hard and covered with rushes, flattened reeds and herbs that sort of absorb the muck if you squint. The main hall is cavernous but dark, with narrow windows and a single hearth crackling at the far end. And there he is, the lord of the manor. You expected a towering figure in plate mail with a hawk on his arm. Instead, You had a man in his late 50s with thinning hair or a wine-stained tunic, and a glazed expression like he's been slightly tipsy since last Wednesday. He's perched on a wooden chair with carved lions on the armrests, listening or pretending to listen as each villager presents their offering. A woman offers a bundle of dyed wool. A man hands over a salted ham that looks suspiciously gnawed. A child awkwardly recites a memorized blessing. The Lord nods at each, occasionally saying something in a slurred, vaguely French accent that nobody questions. Here's your historical fact of the day. In medieval England, the memorial system meant peasants owed goods or services to their local lord in exchange for land access. The lord wasn't necessarily noble, but he held power. His manor was the administrative heart of the village where disputes were settled, justice was dispensed poorly, and feasts were held rarely. In theory, he protected the villagers. In practice, he just sort of owned everything, drank a lot, and occasionally signed documents with an X. You shuffle forward with the crowd, nodding to anyone who makes eye contact. You overhear snippets of conversations. One man's been fined for letting his pig wander onto the Lord's barley patch. Another had to give up his best chicken because his wife called the reeve a frog-faced idiot during Sunday prayers. Justice is swift and heavily poultry-based around here. Eventually, the formalities wind down, and the Lord calls for entertainment. Someone produces a flute. Another strums a lyre with only 3 strings. A girl with pigtails and the confidence of a drunk jester performs a wobbly dance while villagers clap politely. You try not to look too interested, lest someone mistake you for a bard and ask you to perform something. Your knowledge of medieval songs begins and ends with green sleeves and an unfortunate TikTok remix. Here's a fringe fact for your curious mind. Manor houses sometimes had their own private entertainers, jesters, musicians, or storytellers who were considered slightly unhinged but socially useful. They could mock anyone, even the Lord, without being punished mostly. Occasionally they were thrown out a window, but hey, that's job hazard. The mood lightens. The food, such as it is brought out. Some roasted turnips, boiled grains, and a mysterious pie that smells like regret and onions. A few villagers are invited to partake. Most aren't. You're definitely not. But you do manage to sneak a warm cup of mead from an unattended tray. It's sweet, herbal, and makes your knees wobble slightly. Either it's stronger than it tastes, or you're very, very dehydrated. A dog walks past with a goose leg in its mouth. You're not sure if that was dinner or a guest. Later, you slip outside to the back courtyard, hoping to avoid notice and possibly steal another sip of mead. That's when you see the manor kitchen in full swing. It's chaos. Servants bark orders, pots boil over, a child is furiously plucking a goose while sobbing, and someone is skinning a rabbit with terrifying enthusiasm. And here's today's scholarly debate. Just how much better was the life of a manor household servant compared to a peasant in the village? Some say it was cushier, food, shelter, proximity to power. Others argue it was just as grueling, if not worse, with constant surveillance and zero freedom. After all, you're still poor. You just scrub floors under a slightly more expensive roof. By sunset, the feast is winding down. Villagers begin to file out, clutching empty baskets and nodding their thanks. You leave with them a little buzzed, a lot hungry, and weirdly glad to be returning to your drafty barn and judgmental poultry. Because as strange as this village is, at least you know where you stand. In the manor, everything feels performative, polished on the surface but one step away from snapping. That night, as you curl up in your hay, you think about the Lord's slurred voice, the forced cheer, the tired dog dragging its dinner across a rush-covered floor. It's not better up there, just different. And you've officially tasted me, avoided arrest and survived your first glimpse inside the local power structure. You're practically a noble. You're woken before dawn by yelling. Not the usual barnside muttering or someone cursing at a goat. No, this is different. Urgent, harsh, multiple voices tangled in a mess of fear and authority. You sit up, your body protesting like a creaky drawbridge, and scramble to the edge of the loft, peering down through the slats. A group of villagers is gathered outside, lanterns swinging, torches flaring. The reaver is there shouting something about theft, and then you hear it, trial. You've been here long enough to know that word carries weight. A trial here doesn't mean a courtroom and lawyers with wigs. It means something more medieval. Less gavel, more hot iron. You pull on your tunic, still damp from yesterday's fog, and head down to the village green, curiosity outweighing your basic survival instincts. A small crowd has already gathered. their breath rising in clouds under the pale morning light. In the center stands a man, young, maybe mid-20s, with wrists tied and face pale. You recognize him. He was one of the guys who stirred the grain mash near the mill. Quiet, kept to himself. The kind of person you don't notice until something goes wrong. Apparently, something went very wrong. The accusation, stealing grain from the Lord's personal stores, a huge deal, especially during the lean months. The punishment, well, that's what today is about. The priest appears, flanked by two Grimmel-looking elders, and a teenage boy carrying a glowing rod of metal held in tongs. Is a short iron bar, blackened at the ends, but glowing dull red at the center. And that's when you realize what kind of trial this is going to be. Welcome to Trial by Ordeal. Here's your historical fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, guilt was determined not by evidence but by divine judgment. Trial by ordeal meant the accused would undergo a painful test, carrying hot iron, walking over burning coals, or having their arm plunged into boiling water. If the wound healed cleanly within a set number of days, they were declared innocent because God had intervened. If it didn't, well, the logic kind of fell apart after that. You push your way closer, not because you want to see it, but because everyone else is watching and you feel like not watching would make you suspicious. That's how peer pressure works here. Don't flinch, don't question, and definitely don't make eye contact with the Reeve. The priest begins to chant in Latin, slow and somber. The villagers bow their heads. The accused stares at the glowing iron sweat beading on his forehead. Then, with practiced movements, one of the elders places the bar in his hands. He has to carry it 3 steps, arms extended, then drop it onto a marked cloth on the ground. That's it. 3 steps. That's the whole test. He takes the iron, he screams. Not a loud scream, more like a hiss through clenched teeth. His body trembles as he takes the first step. Then the second, then the third. He drops the iron with a sickening hiss as it hits the cloth. Smoke rising from the singed fabric. His hands are already blistering. He collapses to his knees. The priest nods solemnly. The boy is taken away. He'll be locked in a cottage with a healer for 3 days. If the burns heal cleanly, he's free. If they fester or scar, he's guilty. Which is laughable because you saw the burns. They're going to fester. They always fester. Here's your quirky side fact. Some healers, usually older women with herb knowledge and a healthy fear of mobs, were known to nudge the healing process. They'd use clean cloths, honey, or wine to help prevent infection. But if they were caught helping someone deemed guilty, well, let's just say the next trial wouldn't require hot iron, just firewood and accusations of witchcraft. The villagers start to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Some nod approvingly, others look uneasy. You stand still, heart thudding, wondering how many of these people actually believe in the fairness of the ordeal, and how many are just going along with it because they don't want to be the next one in the circle. As you walk away, a boy beside you mutters, "He only took a handful for his sister. She's sick." Then he shrugs as if that somehow justifies what just happened. Or doesn't. Maybe it doesn't matter. The rule is the rule. The grain wasn't his. Intent is a luxury no one can afford here. Back near the barn, you pass a group of women preparing herbs for salves. One whispers something about willow bark and vinegar. You glance back toward the cottage where the accused is now hidden. You wonder if he'll get lucky, if his body will do something miraculous, something fast enough to satisfy everyone else's need for divine justice. You doubt it, and here's where historians love to debate. Was trial by ordeal ever really about justice? Or was it just a tool to maintain order, to keep fear alive, to remind people that power didn't have to make sense, only results? Some argue that it was a genuine attempt to involve the divine. Others say it was a calculated system of control, a way to punish the desperate while letting everyone else sleep better at night. Either way, it worked. No one steals from the Lord, not openly. Not now, is it true? The rest of your day passes in a strange fell. You go through the motions, gathering firewood, helping sweep the bakehouse, even managing to trade a favor for a chunk of cheese that may or may not contain actual cheese. But your mind keeps drifting back to those burned hands. You think about justice, about mercy, about how here survival is the only thing you can really chase. Everything else, morality, fairness, intent, is a game played by people with full stomachs and warm beds. As night falls and the village quiets, you lie in your straw pile, eyes wide open, listening to the wind press against the barn walls. The chickens are settled, the goat is asleep, and your feet ache. You feel colder tonight, and not because of the weather. Because now you've seen what happens when the system flexes, when someone breaks the rule, and everyone watches them burn for it. And worst of all, no one questioned it. You wake up late, which is a luxury you didn't think existed here. The sun is already up, just barely, and the usual sounds of chickens shouting and existential dread are in full swing. Somehow you've overslept without being trampled, yelled at, or assigned a new horrifying task. It's suspicious, too quiet, like the calm before the next historically inaccurate storm. You stretch, yawn, and sit up in the hoft now thoroughly lived in. There's a chicken nestled by your feet again. Clearly you've been accepted as part of the flock, and your tunic is stuck to you with a combination of sweat and yesterday's dried herb paste. You probably need another bath. You're definitely not getting one. You climb down the ladder, careful not to fall, and head toward the center of the village, expecting to be recruited for slop duty or livestock hauling. Instead, you find a line forming in front of the church. People in their best tunics, kids scrubbed pink like someone tried to erase the dirt with a rough sponge. Someone's even holding a fresh bouquet of herbs tied with twine. And that's when you remember it's Sunday, which means one thing, Mass. You freeze, staring at the neat line of villagers slowly filing into the church. The priest, looking extra solemn today, stands near the door, nodding at everyone as they enter, like some kind of medieval nightclub bouncer. You've been inside the church before during that early morning when the bellboy forgot to ring time. But you haven't sat through an actual service yet. Now there's no escape. A woman you vaguely know spots you, grabs your arm and shoves a damp, fragrant clump of rosemary into your hand. "Smell it if you feel faint," she mutters. Keeps the demons out. Before you can reply, she's already pushing you toward the church steps. Inside it's dim and cool, filled with the soft murmur of whispers and the occasional sniffle. Everyone packs into the pews, shoulder to shoulder. There's no personal space. The smell is a fascinating blend of woods, damp wool, herbs, and people who bathe monthly. You slide into a spot near the back, clutching your rosemary like it's a holy relic. Then the priest begins. It's Latin, all of it, a flowing rhythmic drone of a language that you recognize only because you watched one semester of documentaries in college and half understood a Harry Potter spell once. Everyone else mumbles along like it's muscle memory. The cadence is the important part, not the content. You try to fake it, mouthing along, nodding at the right times, occasionally saying amen with what you hope is the right level of conviction. Here's your historical fact for today. Most peasants didn't speak Latin. The entire church service was conducted in it, though because it was the language of the Bible, of the clergy of God. So for the average villager, Mass was more about being seen at church and less about understanding anything happening. It was ritual obligation and a little bit of community surveillance. You glance around. People aren't really focused. Some kneel, some squint at the stained glass. A boy in the next pew is clearly chewing something, possibly hay. One old man has fallen asleep upright, mouth slightly open, snoring gently like he's practiced. And you keep your head down, try not to make eye contact with the priest, and pray no one asks you to recite anything. But here's the fun part. Quirky fact of the day. People often brought animals to Mass. Chickens, dogs, even goats, not as offerings, just because they didn't want to leave them unattended. There were no locks, no barns with secure doors. So yes, it's not unusual when someone's cat darts between pews or a goose honks in the middle of a sermon. It's all part of the holy ambience. Halfway through the service, there's a bit where the priest reads announcements. Not exactly parish news, more like who's been sinning and how. He goes over tithe owed, praises someone for donating a cartwheel, and then launches into a warning about dancing on holy days. You swear you hear your own name, or at least a mangled version of it, mentioned in relation to irreverent behavior near the communal oven. You try not to smile. And here's the scholarly debate of the day. Did peasants actually believe all of this? The rituals, the relics, the saints with suspiciously specific specialties. Some scholars say yes. Faith was real, deep, and omnipresent. Others argue, but it was mostly social pressure. Go to church or people start talking. Don't go to church. And the Reeve starts writing things down. And if things go bad for your crops, people will remember who skipped Mass last week. After an hour of chanting, standing, kneeling, and pretending not to fall asleep, the service ends with the ringing of a handbell and a generous splash of holy water. People shuffle out into the daylight, blinking like moles. The mood is lighter now. Kids run ahead. Women stop to gossip. Men talk about pigs. The priest shakes hands and blesses everyone like a politician on market day. You linger near the edge of the green, chewing on the stem of your rosemary, which tastes like soap and dirt. An old woman you don't recognize stops beside you and mutters, "Better than nothing," gesturing toward the church. God sees, but so do your neighbors. Then she wanders off, leaving you deeply unsettled. The rest of the day is light work. No fields, no trials, just maintenance. Fixing a fence here, collecting firewood there, avoiding eye contact with the church geese. A few people are drinking weak ale outside their cottages, laughing in a way that suggests they're trying to remember what happiness felt like. Someone invites you to sit. You do. They hand you a crust of bread and a smear of something they claim is cheese. It tastes like fermented chalk, but you smile and nod because this apparently is bonding. That night, back in the barn, you lie awake longer than usual. You think about the mass, the chanting, the smell of beeswax and incense, the priest's hollow eyes. You think about how much of this world is based on rhythm, daily labor, weekly rituals, seasonal tasks. No one questions it. Even you now are beginning to fall into line. You wonder how long it would take to believe it all. Not just pretend, believe that your sins are counted, that your dreams mean something, that your suffering has purpose. Outside the church bell rings once. A single toll for evening prayer. No one responds. Everyone's already asleep except you. You wake up in the dead of night. Not because of a nightmare or a screaming rooster this time, but because your stomach is staging a full-blown rebellion. You roll over in the hay, clutching your midsection, hoping it's just a hunger. You felt hunger before. Deep, empty, gnawing hunger that makes you fantasize about roasted anything. But this isn't that. This is betrayal. Your guts have signed an alliance with something ancient. You sit up slowly, vision swimming. The barn spins slightly. The chickens rustle nervously, as if sensing that something unnatural is unfolding in their sacred straw temple. You stagger to your feet, heart pounding. A wave of nausea hits you so hard you almost fall. You barely make it outside before you collapse to your knees and vomit everything you've consumed in the past day, and possibly your memories of it too. And that's when you remember the pottage, the special pottage, the one they handed you yesterday evening, with a wink and a chuckle. Feast day pottage, they said. Extra thick, they said. You remember the odd smell, the slimy texture, the fact that one of the bits in it was definitely a fish or a mushroom or possibly both. Now you understand you've been defeated by soup. You spend the rest of the night curled next to the barn, shivering, sweating, trying not to die, or at least not die in front of the goat who keeps watching like it's taking notes. By dawn, you're dehydrated, weak and radiating, the kind of feverish regret usually reserved for bad camping trips or suspicious gas station sushi. A neighbor spots you slumped by the fence and calls over someone who appears to be a healer, or at least a woman with a large basket of leaves and no patience. She clicks her tongue at you like you're a lazy chicken, then forces a ladle of something warm and bitter into your mouth. It tastes like bark and moss and sadness. She mutters about bad fish and tainted barley, and something she calls goblin belly. You don't have the strength to correct her. At this point, if a goblin crawled out of you, you'd just nod and go back to sleep. And here's your historical fact for the day. Medieval food safety was basically a coin toss. There was no refrigeration. Preserving meant salt, smoke, sun, or blind faith. The rich buried spoiled meat under fistfuls of spice. The poor just ate it and hoped. Food poisoning wasn't rare, it was routine. People learned the lethal mushrooms by dying from them, and the visions ones by seeing saints on flaming turnips. You get hauled back to the barn and cocooned in a heavy, damp dog and onion blanket. Someone presses a mug of weak ale into your hands. Folk medicine by optimism. You sip, drift, and spend the day sliding in and out of fever dreams. The oven woman chanting Latin. The reeve doing a ridiculous jig. A loaf advising you on taxes. By late afternoon, your fever breaks like a storm. Everything hurts, even your pride. You're hollowed out, soup-shaped. Someone gives you a scrap of bread, hard, plain, perfect. You chew it like cake. The herb woman nods. Bread first, then broth. Maybe a turnip if fortune smiles. You ask what exactly felled you. She shrugs. It varies, then next time smell the pot. If it reeks of river and mushrooms, that's not soup. That's vengeance. A tidbit, pottage, the never-ending stew, fed almost everyone below the gentry. Then simmered for days or weeks as people tossed in grain, herbs, meat bits, and questionable roots. Some pots developed personalities. Old tales claim one family kept a single pottage alive for 2 years. accumulating flavor, wisdom, and malice. Historians argue about the food itself. Some say medieval fare could be varied, clever, even good. Others remind us that peasants lived on shortages and near famines, stretching whatever they had into edible pauses between disasters. Back in the barn, you sit with your blanket like a defeated knight's cloak. A goat snuffles your boots, relieved you didn't die and haunted. A chicken lays an egg on your straw as if sending omens. By evening, the nausea has ebbed. Your head still drums. People glance your way with sympathy and quiet judgment. Everyone gets pottage sick eventually, but you're now the one who passed out by the goat and muttered tax law in your sleep. Your laugh wheezes. That night someone brings clear broth, water, onion peel, salt. No floating mysteries. It warms you like a truce. You lie back, light in body from vomiting, and light in mind from realizing survival here is part labor, part weather, and mostly luck, whether a vat sat too long or the barley went bad. You drift off thinking of the Lord's pie that smelled like onion and regret. The gentry aren't immune to soup karma either. You wake sweating, cold crawling sweat, and know the wrongness isn't in you this time. The barn is too still. A whisper rides the lane. Lanterns flicker. A cart waits by the bakehouse with a still bundle on it. Nobody says the word. Everyone knows. The plague has come. In the mid-14th century, the Black Death killed a third to over half of Europe. That isn't a statistic. Here it's every third face gone in months. People blamed sin ere foreigners' cats, everything but the fleas pulling the strings. The Reeve performs authority. One case. No need to panic, which is panic's starter pistol. The sick will be isolated at a forest edge cottage for care and containment. Then a boy coughs, wet, rattling. Faces blanch. He runs, coughing blood. Ellis, you think. The kid you liked who dug ditches last week. Now he's a walking death sentence. Another aside, the beaked plague masks came later. In this era, healers stuffed herbs in pockets or tied cloth over mouths and hoped. It didn't work, but hope has placebo power. Night falls with distant coughing and a bell that doesn't ring. By morning, there are 2 more shrouds on the cart. Even the pigs feel subdued. Then another blow. The communal turnips vanish from their storage pit. Fury replaces fear. Foxes? No, foxes don't carry off 40 turnips. Accusations fly. Outsiders get blamed, meaning you. Turnips are lifelines, dependable, storable, dull. Losing them means hunger. Hunger means sickness. Sickness means death, and here death arrives in batches. The Reeve opens an investigation, which is mostly pacing. Rationing follows. No one defines caught hoarding consequences. No one asks. At dusk you skirt the plague cottage. Smoke curls from the chimney. Ellis opens the door, pale, sweating, alive. A small box holds a few turnips. He doesn't deny it. Exiled, starving, he took them. Don't tell, he whispers. You hand him your bruised apple. High stares like it's a miracle. Were medieval communities cruel or kind? The records show rigid rules and sudden mercy, both. Quiet help happened in the cracks. That night, wolves. Real ones, winter thin, village bold. Torches flare, prayers mutter. A crossbow creaks ominously. Yellow eyes glint at the tree line. A man takes a bite to the arm. The priest improvises bravery and bandages. Legends made wolves devils. Winters made them desperate. At dawn you collapse, then wake to humming. The herbalist at the forest's edge. Every village has her, tolerated, distrusted. Bridge, of course. Her cottage smells of mint and iron. Herbs hang like chandeliers. You fed the boy, she says. She pours you something nettly and alive and says the balance is off. The roots are rotten, the wolves are the heralds. Were herbalists proto-scientists or lucky guessers? Depends on who lived. She wraps wormwood, valerian, yarrow. Bury this under your bed. It'll keep your soul anchored. You don't ask about unanchored souls. Market day breaks the spell. The town is mud and noise. Eels in buckets, saints with crooked eyes, kids racing pigs while adults bet with pebbles. Markets were the region's heartbeat. Commerce, gossip, court, theater. You step in when boys jeer at an old herb seller. Leave her, you say. She gifts you a warm river stone and vanishes. Healer or witch? Politics decided the answer. A bard arrives next. Hat too big, grin bigger, songs stitched from recycled legends. Bards were entertainers, yes, but also rumor pipelines and memory keepers. By firelight he tells a plague story without a happy ending. The village listens like the flames are teaching them. Then Cecily cooks outside the smithy. Aromatic, deliberate, suspicious. Rumor calls it marriage stew. Love potions were a real medieval habit. Herbs, placebos, and coercion tangled together. Someone points at you as her target. She only smiles. By evening she's gone, the pot empty, the gossip spent. Finally, banners on the horizon, a young Lord Edric arrives with velvet, scribes, and a silver order. Nobles don't travel for fun. They travel to count, tax, conscript, and remind everyone who owns the fields. Medieval surveys tallied everything. People, livestock, tools, grain, even windows. Fewer pains, fewer taxes. Your village becomes a temporary estate. Scribes knock on doors. Guards look decorative and dangerous. Hiding fails. A guard summons you to the tent. The Lord lounges like a cat. A scribe sharpens his quill. Name? He says. You give the vaguest one you own and wonder how long luck, herbs, and thin broth can keep a soul anchored in a world that keeps tipping. They ask your occupation. You say barn-adjacent support staff. They ask your origin. You pause long enough that everyone starts to look nervous. Distant, you finally say very distant. Edric narrows his eyes. You're not on the rolls. You shrug. Must have fallen off. He considers this. Then, with the air of someone bestowing a great favor, says, you'll be added. Here's your scholarly debate. Medieval record-keeping was both obsessive and terrible. Some lords kept detailed inventories of every hoe and hen. Others barely remembered which village they owned. But when tax time came around, everyone suddenly wanted names on scrolls. People off the books were a nuisance and sometimes a threat. You're dismissed without ceremony, but now you're official on the record counted, which in this world is a double-edged sword. You exist, and existing means being taxed, tracked, and possibly drafted. That evening, you return to the barn to find your bed has been borrowed by a noble servant who needed somewhere soft. The goat has claimed your spot instead. You sit in the corner with a crust of bread and stare at the tents, glowing with lamplight, and the gentle sound of too much wine being consumed. You fall asleep knowing one thing. This village will never be the same again. Not now that the noble knows it exists. Morning breaks with the rude precision of noble timekeeping. No roosters this time, just trumpets. Actual trumpets. 4 of them playing a tune so obnoxiously regal, it sounds like someone tried to write music while drunk, on fermented pear wine and self-importance. You sit bolt upright in your corner of the barn, straw stuck to your face, and immediately consider going back to sleep out of protest. But it's too late. The noble entourage has taken over everything. The reeve is pacing the square in a panic, trying to coordinate people like they're chess pieces, and not just villagers with sore backs and grumpy goats. The Lord expects a display, he mutters to no one in particular. We must appear impressive. Impressive. You look around at the damp cottages, the lopsided fences, the 3-legged chickens scratching at a puddle with unnerving intensity. Impressive, isn't it exactly this village's strong suit? But today is no longer about survival. It's about presentation. Because Lord Edric is hosting a census celebration, which sounds suspiciously like a party, designed to remind everyone who's in charge. There's to be music, games, dancing, and most importantly, a feast. You, of course, are volunteered to help. No one asks. The reeve just points and says, you've got labor legs. Use them. You spend the morning hauling firewood, carrying baskets of wilted greens, and chasing a pig that someone claimed was trained, but clearly speaks only in chaos. By midday, the square is transformed, at least relatively. Someone swept it. Bunting, made of torn fabric triangles, hangs between trees. The noble servants have set up a canopy with real linen tablecloths which blow in the wind like they're too good to be here. A makeshift stage has been built from broken planks, and someone's even tuned the villagers' one remaining harp, which mostly sounds like a cat in distress, but still points for effort. The feast is set to begin at dusk. Until then, it's entertainment hour. That's how you find yourself watching a juggling competition between 3 toothless men and one very enthusiastic child with questionable hand-eye coordination. A sheep interrupts the act midway by wandering into the ring, causing one juggler to trip and land in a basket of turnips that may or may not have been accounted for in the last week's scandal. The crowd loves it. You end up in a tug-of-war match between the baker's apprentices and a group of angry milkmaids, and you are very nearly pulled into a puddle so deep it probably has its own postal code. You only survive by letting go of the rope at just the right moment, sending everyone else tumbling, while you pretend it was strategy and not sheer panic. Here's your historical fact. Festivals and feasts weren't just for nobles. Villages held seasonal celebrations, usually tied to the church calendar or agricultural cycles, complete with food, dancing, and games. They were both distraction and necessity, a rare break from the grinding routine of survival. Even if you only had porridge and flat ale, you called it a feast because names make things feel important. Back near the canopy, the noble scribes are scribbling, probably noting which villagers look particularly strong or how many pigs are healthy enough to be taxed. Lord Edric lounges on a padded bench, sipping from a jeweled cup and offering the occasional nod like a benevolent statue. He hasn't spoken directly to anyone all day, but the servants dart back and forth to keep him supplied with small pies, fresh fruit, and the kind of wine that smells like vinegar, but costs more than the entire village makes in a week. And then finally the food arrives. You're handed a plate. Not a bowl, a plate. Wooden, splintered, and questionably clean, but still a flat surface that separates your food from the ground. That's luxury, the meal. Roast chicken. You think mashed root vegetables, a hunk of cheese and a small tart that tastes faintly of apples and entirely of sugar, which hits your tongue like a forgotten dream. You eat in silence, sitting at the edge of the square, watching as the others dance to music played by a traveling fiddler who may or may not have fleas. It doesn't matter. Everyone's smiling. Even the reeve looks marginally less constipated than usual. And then Lord Edric stands. Silence falls immediately. He steps onto the stage with the stiff elegance of someone who has never climbed a hill in his life and raises a goblet. To the king, he declares, and to his loyal people. Everyone raises their mugs and murmurs assent. And he adds to new beginnings. People glance around confused. New beginnings. That's when he explains it. The census wasn't just about counting. It was about evaluating. This village, he says, shows potential. The land is fertile, the people hardy, which is why effective immediately. It's being upgraded to a provisioning outpost. You look around, no one knows what that means. He explains further. An outpost supplies the Lord's estate with regular goods, grain, livestock, firewood, and labor. More taxes, more rules, more oversight. You're now important, which in feudal terms translates to useful enough to be drained dry. There's polite applause. A few villagers cheer. Others just look stunned. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. Promotions like this weren't always good news. More responsibility meant more pressure. Lords expected quotas, and if the village failed to meet them due to blight, storms, or plague, they were still punished. Being noticed was sometimes worse than being forgotten. You watch Lord Edric descend from the stage, oblivious to the mix of relief and dread his words have sown. He raises his goblet again and toasts himself this time. And here's your scholarly debate for the evening. Did feudal hierarchy protect villages or prey on them? Some argue the system kept order and stability in chaotic times. Others say it was little more than legalized exploitation, trapping generations in cycles of debt and labor. Like so much in this time, the answer depends on which end of the tax scroll you're standing on. You return to the barn under a sky full of stars, the sounds of music still echoing faintly behind you. You're full for the first time in days, and exhausted in a way that reaches into your bones. You lie down, stare up at the rafters, and whisper to no one new beginnings. You're not sure if it's a promise or a warning. The morning after the celebration, everything smells like regret. Not emotional regret, though there's plenty of that, but actual physical regret in the form of leftover tart crusts, spilled ale fermenting in the dirt, and a sharp, inexplicable scent that may or may not be someone's lost sock stew. You wake up to it seeping into the barn from all directions. The scent of festivity turns sour. You shuffle out into the daylight, with your blanket still wrapped around your shoulders like a tattered royal cape, greeted by a village that looks like it's halfway between hangover and hysteria. Someone's collapsed under the butter churn. A chicken is wearing a small hat. The reeve is sitting on a log, staring into the middle distance with the thousand-y stare of a man who now has responsibilities. The noble caravan is still here, barely. The banners are sagging. The horses look offended by everything. And Lord Edric hasn't emerged from his tent since last night. Some say he's still sleeping. Others whisper that he's locked in a battle with his own digestion. You, meanwhile, are put back to work. The noble scribes are doing inventory again, this time counting animals, storing names, checking who owns what, or rather who thinks they own what. You're assigned to help one of them, a young man named Willem who smells faintly of ink, damp parchment, and crippling anxiety. Willem walks through the village with a scroll so long it drags in the dirt. List all property, he mutters. 1 goat, 2 ducks, half a fence. Yes, that counts. You help him decipher the ramblings of villagers who insist their pigs are on holiday, or their tools were borrowed by the wind. One man claims he's owed back taxes and bread. Willem writes it all down with the deadpan precision of someone who has stopped questioning anything. You pass the oven house. The oven woman glares at the scribe as if she's deciding whether she can bake him into a pie and blame it on local folklore. You make a mental note to never cross her. Here's your historical fact for the day. When nobles expanded their holdings, one of the first things they did was assess everything, not just land, but labor, productivity, and potential for profit. Feudal records like memorial rolls or doomsday books were exhaustive. If you owned 3 geese in a slightly tilted wheelbarrow, it went on the list. Nothing was too small or too taxable. By midday, Willem and you reach the edge of the village where Ellis's old trail disappears into the woods. Will squints at the underbrush. There's a structure marked here, he says, confused. A cottage? You hesitate. Say nothing. Willem raises an eyebrow. It's abandoned. You nod. He scratches something out and writes dilapidated. You exhale. The visit ends without incident, but that cottage is now on a noble ledger, and you can feel a tickle of worry under your ribs that won't go away. Later, back in the square, preparations begin for what the Reaver is calling structural alignment, which is a very noble way of saying, let's tear down everything crooked and pretend we live in a model village. The new order demands that homes be inspected, fences mended, and livestock kept in standardized enclosures. Even the church gets roped into it. The monk reluctantly dragging a bench outside, grumbling about symmetry and heresy. The Reeve barks at a group of children to stop playing near the noble's cart. They respond by tying reeds to a chicken and calling it a sky beast. You wish deeply that you could join them. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. Medieval villages didn't follow blueprints. They grew like weeds, organically, unevenly, often built from whatever was lying around. The idea of symmetry, zoning, or enforced layout came from cities, not places like this. So when nobles tried to impose order, the result was usually resentment, half-finished walls, and at least one person falling into a ditch. You spend the rest of the afternoon helping fix a fence you don't own with wood that doesn't fit under the supervision of a reeve who doesn't know how the nails work. You hammer, saw, and splinter your fingers with the grace of a one-legged goat. By the time the sun starts to dip, you're covered in sweat, dirt, and something that smells suspiciously like fermented cabbage. And that's when Lord Edric finally emerges. He looks worse than yesterday. Paler, hollow-eyed, wearing the kind of expression that suggests he's reconsidering his career, his birthright, and maybe all of existence. His velvet coat is buttoned wrong. His boots are dusty. He looks around at the village like he's seeing it for the first time, and not liking what he sees. He mutters something to his steward, who writes it down grimly. You hear a phrase whispered from the scribe's contingency plan. That night, while others are snoring, arguing, or chasing goats that have escaped the new standardized enclosure, you sneak out to the edge of the woods and follow the trail to Ellis's cottage. He's there, thinner, paler, but alive. You pass him a piece of stale bread and tell him what's happened. He listens in silence. They'll take this place, he says quietly. You nod. I know. He glances at the moon through a crack in the roof. Then I'll move deeper. There are ruins beyond the ridge, forgotten places. I'll manage. You want to argue? You want to offer a better solution, but there isn't one. Not in this world. Here's your scholarly debate. When power reaches too far, what happens to the margins? Historians wrestle with the question of how centralized control shaped rural lives. Some argue it brought stability. Others insist it crushed autonomy. But for people like Ellis, and maybe even like you, it often meant one thing disappear or be rearranged. You return to the village in the dark, where fires still crackle, and the scribe's tents cast long shadows across the green. You lie down in the barn exhausted and uneasy, because while the village might be getting upgraded, it's not for the villagers, it never was. And you can't shake the feeling that the next bell you hear won't be calling for celebration. It'll be calling for change. You wake up to laughter. Sharp, rhythmic, the kind that sounds rehearsed but isn't. It's not the usual kind of village laughter either. Not the tired chuckle of someone pretending to enjoy pottage, or the wheezing gapper of the baker. after one too many ales. This is court laughter performed decorative a show. You roll over in the hay and blink through the barn slats. Outside, the morning light is still soft, still low. You can just make out figures gathering on the village green again. Servants, scribes, a few uncertain villagers. No trumpet this time, only a thin, uncanny laughter drifting across the damp air like a perfumed bad omen. You throw on your tunic and wander over, braced for another tax form, another speech, another symbolic, "We own your shovel now." What you find stops you cold. A large, droopy, mildly bewildered cow stands on a freshly scrubbed rug, hooves polished, a flower garland around her neck. Beside her, Lord Edric, resplendent in a new cloak, clutching a scroll and a gleaming sword. He looks exhausted. The reeve clears his throat. "By noble decree, the Lord of Thornwick will bestow a special honor upon this beast." A prank? A ritual? A moon-mad rite? No, a knighting. Edric steps forward, nods gravely to the cow, raises his sword and intones, "For unwavering service, steadfast strength and exemplary milk, I name thee Lady Bess of Mudford." He taps each shoulder with the flat of the blade. The cow blinks and chews. Someone gasps. Then clapping, then cheering, then chanting, "Ah, Bess, Bess, Bess!" You stand there, open-mouthed, watching absurd history happen. Historical note. Livestock were lifelines in the Middle Ages. A good cow could mean survival. And while knighting one sounds ridiculous, courts did grant animals honorary titles. Sometimes as satire, sometimes out of boredom. You ask a nearby man what's going on. He shrugs. Edric lost a wager last night, something about chess. His steward said the locals needed cheering. Now the cow's a knight. Somehow that track's Bess, newly dubbed, is led around the green like royalty. Someone ties a blue ribbon to her tail. A child offers wilted herbs. The oven woman crafts a turnip-top crown and settles it on Bess's head. The cow receives it all with the patience of a creature here to chew grass and collect honors. Quirky fact. Animals were once tried in court. Real trials, judges, witnesses. Pigs for theft, dogs for biting nobles. Even locusts excommunicated by bishops. If a cow can be knighted, we're barely scratching medieval weird. The celebration rolls on with a kind of joyous nonsense the village hasn't felt in weeks. 2 flutes and a pot lid for music. A poem for Bess that rhymes once but still makes people cry. The reeve declares a rest day. A child builds a little throne out of firewood. Bess refuses to sit. Then a feast, homegrown, shared. Bowls of peas, a chunk of hard cheese, one exceptionally brave pigeon. Honey cakes. Cider not even watered down. You contribute half a loaf from the barn and tear it for the children. One hugs you. You nearly cry, scholarly debate. Was community forged in spite of feudal power or beyond it? Some say true strength lived in these small, stubborn moments of shared laughter and lentils at dusk. By evening, Bess returns to her stall, garland drooping, legend secured. Edric vanishes, likely nursing a regret-flavored headache. The scribes keep scribbling, unsure how to record a bovine noble. You head back to the barn, full belly, lighter heart. That night you watch stars through the roof slats and think of the cow, not for her title, not for the cheers, but because for one perfect day under the twin shadows of tax and plague, people chose to celebrate something silly, joyful, harmless. It felt more magical than any spell. You wake to a strange quiet. Not dawn's hush, not the soft after-rain stillness, an empty, hollow silence like something slipped away while everyone slept. You rise, scan the barn, animals present. The goat snoring. The chicken dreaming of conquest. Outside, no birdsong, no doors creaking, no baker's dog. Your stomach tightens. The village is unchanged and yet altered. The tents are gone. The noble retinue, carts, banners, scribes, servants, vanished in the night without trumpet or farewell. Only absence, like a storm that forgot to make noise. On the green, the padded chair imprint remains, plus a few parchment scraps half buried in wet grass. One reads, "Requisition 20 chickens, denied." You pocket it. The reeve shuffles in, bleary, wrapped in his emergency cloak that looks suspiciously like an X-curtain. "Gone," he mutters, staring at the empty space. "Didn't even wake me. I'm the reeve." You try not to laugh. People emerge, relieved and confused. The oven woman raises an eyebrow. "Told you they wouldn't last." Someone cheers. Shepherd's trade looks like they've just dodged a reckoning. The pigs grunt, newly confident in their tax-exempt future. But a wire of tension hums. If they left without warning, Either they had a noble change of heart or they were running. You nosy closer because no one else will, and curious is your fatal flaw. Near the tree line, you find a broken cartwheel. The grass is raked where something heavy was dragged. Bootprints, deep hurried, lead into the woods. You follow a few paces and spot a pouch hanging from a low branch. Inside, a folded letter, red wax cracked, Edric's seal. The hand is jagged, rushed, left early. No time to explain. Something wrong with the woods. Sounds at night. Eyes in the trees. We may have stayed too long. Tell no one. Burn this, you do not burn it. You tuck it into your cloak and say nothing. The village stitches itself back together. The smith relights his forge. Children resume their eternal debate over who owns the king. Bess wears a paper crown. Historical note, even festive noble visits were disruptions. Afterward, villages had to reassemble, physically, economically, emotionally, like rebuilding after a flood, except the flood drank your wine and knighted your cow. Folklore aside, medieval whispers warned of places where travelers lingered too long, woods that watched, time that warped, paths that swallowed, not written down but carried in warnings in the silences around the forest's edge. By evening, Bridge appears by the well. No one saw her arrive. She simply is, cloaked in twigs, hair full of bramble secrets. She catches your eye and murmurs, "They weren't meant to stay that long." You blink. "The nobles?" She nods. "The land doesn't like being counted." You show the note. She doesn't touch it, only cocks her head like she already knows. "They heard the old sounds," she says. "Things this village stopped listening to generations ago." You ask what things. She shrugs. "The kind that don't care about names or banners. The kind that were here before roads. Scholarly debate. Was superstition mere fog and fear or a coded resistance? Perhaps people sensed in their own language that the land itself had power, that nature watched, remembered, and answered." Bridge turns to go, then pauses. "Don't worry," she says gently. "The woods are only interested in those who think they're in charge." You stand there long after she disappears, staring at the dark fringe of trees, half expecting something to step out and wink. The wind rises. Animals grow restless. Even Bess seems pensive. You think of Ellis somewhere beyond the ridge and the old ruins, of bootprints and silence and eyes in trees. You don't dream, or you don't remember. But deep in the night you jolt awake, and from the woods comes a single low melodic hum, then nothing. Take a moment to let go of everything around you. Close your eyes gently. Inhale deeply. Feel your chest rise. Hold it for a second, and now slowly exhale. Let your shoulders drop. Let your body soften. With every breath, you are drifting into calm. Nothing else matters right now. Just your breath, your peace, your stillness,